Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, today we're going to talk about one of the top 5 nabis and messengers and prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. The top 5, the biggest 5, perhaps the most significant 5, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them to be our Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ibrahim, Isa, Musa, and Nuh alayhi salam. Nuh alayhi salam was the first prophet who was sent as a prophet for all of humanity, not just a specific tribe, going back to when Adam alayhi salam came down. Now, over the last video, we went over Idris alayhi salam. Just after Idris alayhi salam, we went over how the transition happened of shirk, and over several generations, shirk began to spread. It came to such a point that there was no Muslim, there was no one who believed in the oneness of Allah except for one, and his name was Nuh alayhi salam. Now, before we continue, I do want to segue here because a lot of people ask, where do you get this content from? A lot of it is found from Riwayat Israeli, which are found in tafsir of many scholars that I have compiled the notes of and summarized to present these 8, 7, 6, 10-minute videos for you all to really take the most essence and the most basic understanding of these stories that present themselves from these Riwayat Israeli, Quranic revelations, and the Hadith and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The very first video of this series actually goes into detail, so I encourage you to go back and look into that video to find out what are Riwayat Israeli, which ones we can take and which ones we can't take. Now, also understand that in a lot of these stories, because there are no hukam, there are no hukum, there are no commandments that are being sent down, some hadiths that are shared to strengthen other ahadith, and they may be presented as daif. Now, I try to stay away from those as much as possible. However, they may prop up if significant individuals before me, scholars and ulama and muhaddiseen and mufassirin, they had tabulated these ahadith in conjunction with the tafsir of the stories that are presented of these anbiya within the Holy Quran. Now, Nuh alayhi salam, a very exciting, a very interesting prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He comes down, he's the only prophet. He preaches and he preaches and he preaches. And after decades of preaching, one individual becomes a Muslim. Another decade passes, another Muslim comes about. And so he is giving it his all. In fact, the Quran reveals 50 years less than 1,000 years of preaching, meaning 950 years he preaches. Now, some tafsirs, they say at most he managed to collect 80 people. At most. And the other narrations they mention, he only managed to collect 10 Muslims who actually believed in the message of Nuh alayhi salam. As 950 years are trickling by, and these 80 or these 10 or somewhere in the middle, these people who accept Muslims, they're not those who are of repute among society. They're the poorest of the poor. They are the neglected ones of society. No one cares about. But Allah cares about them. For Allah, these are the most superior forms of humanity, and those who think they're superior are actually inferior in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 950 years Nuh alayhi salam preaches to his friends, to his family, to his enemies, and all of them, they make fun of him. They say, "You're a madman. You're crazy work. Who are you? Why are you preaching? You have wasted away your life. What do you have to show for your life?" Some of them, they beguile Nuh alayhi salam. They say, "We will accept your mission, but you know these people that are poor, that are dejected, that are not good forms of society, throw them away from your mission. Then we will join." Nuh alayhi salam retorts. He says, "If I send them away, then what will I take in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah is the ultimate judge, not me. They have believed in the mission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're equal to me and they're superior to you." And the people, they took offense to this. Finally, 950 years pass by. After 950 years of patience, 950 years of perseverance, 950 years of preaching over and over and over and over again. My dear brothers, we get tired after a few hours, some after a few days, some after a few weeks, after we've done the same old thing. Some of us are doctors, some of our taxi drivers, Uber drivers, truck drivers. You drive for 30 years maximum, you work for 40 years, 50 years. Everyone wants retirement. Nuh alayhi salam, 950 years, did not take a singular break. Every day in and every day out, he would be preaching the message of Islam. And what does he have to show after 950 years? 10 to 80 people at maximum who accepted the message of Nuh alayhi salam. 950 years pass by. Nuh alayhi salam raises his hands, makes that famous dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Allah, for 950 years I've preached and I've toiled and I've persevered and I have hearkened them out loud and I've whispered to them and I have gone to them close and have gone from afar. 950 years, Ya Allah, even if I continue for another 1,000 years, Ya Allah, no one upon this earth is going to accept Islam. Ya Allah, even the people who are alive upon this earth, if they continue to remain alive, they will manipulate the people who I have managed to convert to Islam, managed to convert out of shirk and towards you. Ya Allah, deal with them. Ya Allah, their matter is now in your hands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Nuh, you are to stop immediately your preaching. Now spend all of your time, go upon this spot, upon this mountain, and start building an ark from the plank, from the wood of this specific tree. So Nuh alayhi salam goes and he begins to chop off the wood and he begins to plank and he begins to create. And the way the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes into existence, as he chops a plank, it fits perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle, one on top of one another. They are cut into exact different pieces. By the time Nuh alayhi salam comes back, the tree is exactly in one piece, as if no wood has fallen from that tree, so that the toil of Nuh alayhi salam is not a lot. The people around Nuh alayhi salam, they begin to see, what is Nuh doing? What is Nuh doing? First, this guy's preaching for 950 years. Now he's wasting the rest of his life building an ark. What use will an ark do in this mountainous region that we live in? Is he going to fly away? Is he going to run away upon this ark? What is this ark going to do? They used to call him crazy. They called him crazy even more so. They said this guy, he was a prophet, so to speak, quote unquote. Na'udhu billah, astaghfirullah. They called him names in a beguiling way to Nuh alayhi salam. And now they say, now that didn't work out for him, so he's become a carpenter. They're making fun of Nuh alayhi salam. And what kind of carpenter is he? He's making things that no one wants. People are making fun of Nuh alayhi salam. As they're making fun of Nuh alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also instructs him. He instructs him to tell all of his people to go and seek shelter in their spaces. Do not align themselves, do not converse with those who disbelieve, and wait for the signal of Allah. What is the signal of Allah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send water from amongst the stove. The stove themselves will erupt from water because of the vastness of water that will erupt from the heavens and from the earth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So after a few years, some say that Nuh alayhi salam, in some narrations it comes, he spent 100 years constructing this ark this ark that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him to construct. Some narrations, they mention that it was 900 meters long, 150 meters wide, 90 meters high. Other narrations, they mention that it had 3 stories, each story being 10 yards high, so 30 yards in height. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed him, this specific story exists in many different variations amongst many different religions. We're focused on the most authentic revelation within the Holy Quran that is backed by tafsir and backed by the Sunnah and Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. He lined up all of the animals, and when the signal was given, when the earth split and the water began to erupt, and the skies split and the water began to erupt. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered everyone in. The animals took the first row, the first floor, the humans the second, and the birds the third. And so everyone fit in. The people, even though it was raining, they began to continue to make fun of him. And in Surah Nuh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, "Oh Nuh, you have nothing to worry about. Allah will safeguard and protect your family." Now, what was the family of Nuh alayhi salam? He had four sons. They were Sam, Ham, Yam, and Yathith. One of them was not Muslim. So 3 of them went into the ark. One of them was left out of the ark. As the water began to fill up, the water reached the tops of the mountains. Nuh alayhi salam is calling out to his son, the one who is not a Muslim, Yam, come onto the ark. And as he's beaconing, as he's hearkening his son, a huge tidal wave comes, sucks him up, takes him away, puts him and drowns him inside of that water. Nuh alayhi salam, he in anguish, in grief, looks up to Allah. Ya Allah, you are of the most truth. You said you would not harm any one of my family. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, who told you that that is one of your family? Your family is only they who believe in the oneness of Allah and follow your teachings as my messenger and as my prophet. So my dear brothers, rather than believe in the bond of blood, the bond of shahada, the bond of ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh is far stronger, as we can learn from the story of Nuh alayhi salam. Some narrations, they mention that the Ark of Nuh, and by the way, the Ark of Nuh wasn't like it was a ship. It was actually covered up top as well. It was an engineering marvel of its time. So it was like a submarine, and it was submerged, or it was floating, or it was traveling with this dua, by the way, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Bismillahi majreha wa mursaha inna rabbi laghafurur rahim. And so it continued to travel for 6 months. Every day Nuh alayhi salam would open a small hole and send a pigeon out, and every day the pigeon would come back wet. One day, after 6 months, it came back with the leaf of an olive tree without any wetness. And Nuh alayhi salam knew that that was the sign. Upon this point, the ark, it rested on a mountain. In many narrations, it comes on a mountain that is called Mount Judi, which is found in present-day Turkey. And so the gates were opened. The sun was shining, the ground was relatively dry, the clouds had parted, and so the people came out and they began to repopulate upon the earth. The animals, they began to repopulate upon the earth. The last miracle here of Nuh alayhi salam is, amongst all of the people that had come out of the ark, only Nuh alayhi salam with his wife were the only individuals that were able to reproduce. That's why they call him the second Adam, and also the second father of humanity, because not only are we all the sons of Adam, but we're also the sons of Nuh alayhi salam, because through him the rest of the progeny of humanity assembled and began to go. He fasted just about every single day after that day, after he rested, and by some accounts and some narrations, he was buried in present-day Makkah. We don't know where his grave is. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to witness the great Nabi Nuh alayhi salam on the day of judgment, and we can ask him how he built the ark and what did it look like and how was his patience and perseverance for 950 years. My dear brothers and my dear sisters, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we take lessons from the stories of the Anbiya, that we learn patience and perseverance through the story of Nuh alayhi salam. And I hope that you continue to join me as we continue this series of Anbiya in these few minutes, so you can get a gist of the most important parts of these stories. Jazakumullah, barakallah fi. Assalamu alaikum.